And just to say that we look forward to meaningful discussions as we go through the items on the agenda. Item 5 reads the... Okay. I also want to welcome Ms. Yannick Douglas, who is assisting in the capacity of Legislative Counsel. I want to welcome you to the meeting of the Internal and External Affairs Committee. We move to item 5, which is reading and confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on June 1, 2022. I know that the minutes were circulated, so I would take it that it would have been read by all the members. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? So I move for the confirmation. Confirmed by Member Brown, seconded Member Hanna. Thank you. Okay, so we move to item 7, which is the examination of the independent Commission of Investigations report. And the officers from the commission are here with us, so we just ask that they be invited in. Just want to welcome the members of the team from the Independent Commission of Investigation, and just to welcome you to the meeting of the Internal and External Affairs Committee of Parliament. And we're looking forward to meaningful and frank discussions here today. Before we go into any further discussions, I would just ask that you introduce yourselves to the members of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the members of the Internal and External Affairs Committee, and the support staff of Parliament. It's our pleasure to be here, sir, and we must introduce the team. I am informed the Commissioner of PBCJ, and to my right is our Principal Finance Officer, Mr. George. My immediate left is our Assistant Commissioner, Mr. David Campbell. And to his left is my Senior Director of Corporate Services, Mrs. Marion.
Thank you, sir, for those introductions, and we'll I'll now ask that before we go into any further discussions, that you provide us with a brief summary of your report before we go into the discussions.
Right. If I may proceed with your leave, Mr. Chairman. Right. So, my presentation, sir, and members of the committee, will include our strategic vision for the next 5 to 10 years. We'll present to you a summary of the use of force and fatal shootings and our 2022 year-in review summarized. We have sent to Parliament the full report for 2022, but in my presentation I'll just give the summary. And again, Mr. Chairman, it may be known to all that we submit on an annual basis 4 quarterly reports to Parliament. So each report provides the statistical data for the respective quarter, addressing 3 core elements: our new complaints, the performance by our legal department, and the Commission's public information data. Additionally, from time to time, each quarterly report may include research conducted into aspects of the performance and activities of the Jamaica Constabulary Force, the Jamaica Defense Force, and the Department of Correctional Services. And we target specific issues and provide greater scrutiny, analysis, observation, and recommendations to these particular issues that we believe are in need of attention. And Appendix 1 at the back of the response will highlight some of the areas that we have looked into over the years. And these quarterly reports have multiple aims. First of all, we're a Commission of Parliament, so we seek to inform Parliament under the Commission's obligations expressed at Section 17(2)(c) of the Independent Commission of Investigations Act. And this, we believe, is worthwhile obligation to provide a measure of transparency and accountability on the use of force exercised by the security forces. And we also seek to encourage changes in how the law enforcement bodies execute their mandate, especially where such changes would lessen the use of deadly force and, in addition, professionalize the interaction between the law enforcement bodies and the citizens of Jamaica. Now, Mr. Chairman and members, INDECOM was conceptualized a little bit before 2010, but came into operations in the latter half of the calendar year of 2010. And INDECOM has made a significant impact on the landscape of Jamaica in terms of the reduction of fatalities. In other words, the data is showing that since the inception of INDECOM, it may be difficult to empirically link them, but I think reasonable deductions can be made. 2010, just thereafter and before, we were experiencing in excess of 250, in some years, fatalities. Thankfully, that has reduced since the inception of INDECOM to last year was 134, so at least a 50% reduction. So INDECOM has had positive impact on the landscape, and I think that's a reasonable deduction to make. So in looking at our strategic vision, we reviewed the performance of INDECOM for the first 10 years and identified the successes, one of which I've named, and the challenges. And it is from that we have identified the strategic vision to lead us, members and Mr. Chairman, into the next short to medium term. And we're seeking to ensure that where we have successes, those will remain. And so we have reviewed our organizational structure, the legislative and governance framework, and the technological reach. These are the areas that guide us in terms of the formulation of our strategic vision. And so, Mr. Chairman and members, we are seeking to ensure that the Commission continues to be properly equipped and staffed to undertake investigations thoroughly, diligently, competently, and in a timely manner. This is one of the areas that we'll be placing emphasis on, utilizing all the modern tools of forensic science and technology that today's investigative professionals would have at their command. We have emphasized institutional corporate governance at INDECOM. So, and Mr. Chairman, let me put it this way. The government has quite a sizable manual that touches on concern public sector corporate governance. But if you look at that document, it really addresses in detail those entities where there's a minister appoints a chairman, and the chairman has a board, etc. So I believe the corporate governance document and guidelines lean towards such a situation. But in terms of a commission of parliament, it may have escaped my attention, but I have not come across a document that addresses the public sector corporate governance for commissions of parliament, given their unique nature. So we are seeking to ensure that in addition to our operational successes, we are on point in terms of the corporate governance framework. So, INDECOM, we have introduced finance committees in compliance with the Financial Administration and Audit Act, Public Bodies Management and Accountability Act. We have also introduced audit committees, and that may be a little bit of the cart going before the horse, because we are also establishing an internal audit unit, Mr. Chairman and members, so that INDECOM has its first line of oversight, and that does not leave us with the only oversight being the external oversight, which would be the Auditor General. So we are establishing, so God willing, we have taken these steps. So by the first month of the new financial year, we hope to have on board, for the first time, a senior internal auditor. So that in terms of compliance with policies, in terms of compliance with the financial regulations, etc. My principal finance officer is here, but we have our own internal oversight. There are times when an internal auditor is required, and currently we have to rely on the internal audit unit of the Ministry of Justice. So we are taking steps to correct that governance anomaly in short order. We have also introduced again in terms of the corporate governance, I have started by example in that regard to establish a succession manual for the commissioner of INDECOM. So whoever should succeed in that office, they have a comprehensive document. So whether that appointee is from within the organization or from without the organization, then that manual will be there to guide the person as to what are the requirements of the commissioner's office. And that we are expanding in terms of the entire corporate structure of the commission to emphasize succession planning. Right. Now, let me just, and I believe it's useful, Mr. Chairman, to advise the Internal and External Affairs Committee that currently we receive funding from the British government's Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, FCDO. This was formerly DFID. But from my understanding, I've been advised and verily believe that the tenure of this assistance goes to 2025, yes. But so the government had agreed to a scheduled acceptance of some of the obligations currently funded by FCDO over a period, a gradual transition. So again, we raise that because that is an expenditure that we do not wish to be sprung as a surprise, but that is in the making, Mr. Chairman, in terms of the gradual reduction. Whether there will be any review of that position from the external body, that may be the case, but we just raise this for completeness in terms of funding. Now, Mr. Chairman, I've indicated to you that INDECOM commenced in 2010. So at about this time, it is really a good juncture to make an assessment of what has transpired and what is required for us to be the leading independent civilian oversight body in possibly the globe, maybe too ambitious, but possibly the globe, Mr. Chairman. INDECOM, we are independent because the Act mandates that we take directions from no one. And as you know, in the structure of the Commission of Parliament, we do not report to a minister. We report to Parliament. Our independence is also emphasized to the extent that no person serving at INDECOM is a serving member of any of the law enforcement bodies. So, independent in three aspects: civilian oversight. So our strategic vision is seeking to reinforce that our definition and to ensure that we meet the needs of the public of Jamaica in a timely manner. So, goal number one, Mr. Chairman, and we have identified 6 goals which we believe will help us to achieve the vision which we seek. And the vision is for the Commission to, in a timely manner, and in fact we are working towards a 1-year investigative cycle to complete matters, and to do so diligently, professionally, with a motivated staff, and to be a global leader in independent civilian oversight. And I emphasize that because many jurisdictions have various models of oversight, but ours is the independent civilian. Many of them have a mix where persons within law enforcement play a role. Right. So, in pointing out the vision, Mr. Chairman, there will be a couple of external considerations that will determine whether we meet our goal. And one of them that I'll come back to is the ballistics, the returns for ballistics from the lab. So we'll be a voice in support of the lab in terms of expanding its ballistics capabilities, Mr. Chairman. So our vision identifies, yes, what we have to do, but we'll also have to highlight those external factors that we believe, if addressed, will assist us in achieving our vision. So goal number one, Mr. Chairman, and we're at Parliament, so we speak with the legislative amendments that we believe are necessary. Now, we have revised our mission, so we have now tailored our mission to reflect what a mission statement must reflect, which is what is your mandate. So we have recrafted our mission. And, Mr. Chairman, one of the objectives that we seek and for which we rely on Parliament is that some amendments are needed to the INDECOM Act itself. In addition to the INDECOM Act, well, let me just state, for the INDECOM Act, the incident scenes that we visit, remember the scenes that we visit will also have other law enforcement bodies. We believe that some regulations would assist in tailoring the mandate and authority of INDECOM to investigate matters. And in addition to that, officers provide us with statements, interview and statements. Regulations, we believe, are needed in that area of the statements produced by officers. If not, you'll find an anomaly in terms of the statements officers collect from the citizens of Jamaica in terms of incidents and the statements that they give when statements are given in regard to INDECOM matters. So there ought to be a legislative format that the statements follow in terms of a declaration of truth and other components of a statement. So those will be seeking Parliament to further. Additionally, Mr. Chairman, the INDECOM Act has been through what I would term judicial gymnastics, in that even within the local jurisdiction, one court had ruled in a particular direction as to the powers of INDECOM, powers of arrest, etc. And another court had ruled in another direction. And thankfully, the matter was settled by the Privy Council, which confirms that INDECOM is an investigative body for whom the prosecutorial arm is the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. So there is clarity in law, Mr. Chairman. But during that period, when the law was unsettled, we believe that the validation and indemnification provisions would be necessary to validate those acts done by INDECOM in good faith during the time when the law was unsettled. That act would help to be a shield against any action. So that has commenced, and again, we express gratitude to the Ministry of Justice for the work done so far. That is close to completion, but as you would anticipate, sir, our hope is for completion, the indemnification and validation of the acts of INDECOM over a particular period. Right. Additionally, Mr. Chairman, we also will be seeking Parliament's attention in terms of the Committal Proceedings Act. Jamaica has moved away from the what I would term the usual system of inquiries, preliminary inquiries, and has introduced a more focused Committal Proceedings Act. So under the Committal Proceedings Act, under the old preliminary inquiry system, a witness would go through the details of their alleged encounter at the preliminary inquiry. When the matter goes to circuit, they go through the same set of circumstances again. The Committal Proceedings Act, Mr. Chairman, it allows for the parish judge to accept the statements of witnesses in the like manner as if that person had given oral evidence. So the preliminary inquiry, the Committal Proceedings inquiry, in my view, reduces the occasions where possibly a traumatized witness has to go through all of that verbal recount of what had transpired, and now would only do so at the circuit court trial if the matter is sent to circuit. But the Committal Proceedings Act mentions at section 6.2a that if the statement is recorded by a member of the JCF, Jamaica Constabulary Force, in the presence of a justice of the peace, then the parish judge, usually it's a parish judge, can accept that statement as if it had been given orally. So that section may be inadvertently did not include statements collected by INDECOM. So we would wish, and there are other bodies one can think of that would also benefit from an amendment to this provision. So that is one of the legislative changes that we are desirous of. The other, Mr. Chairman, as you know, INDECOM has oversight responsibility for correctional facilities, in addition to JCF and JDF. The Corrections Act of 1985, Mr. Chairman, permits a correctional officer, and it states, may use weapons against any inmate, and I shorten the provision without hopefully losing the essence of what it permits, Mr. Chairman and members. Every correctional officer may use weapons against any inmate where he has reasonable grounds to believe that he cannot prevent the escape. Section 15.4 of the 1985 Corrections Act states that before using firearms against an inmate, the correctional officer shall, if possible, give warning to the inmate that he is about to fire on him. Now, Mr. Chairman, we have a challenge, but we will rely on the wisdom of Parliament. And we are of the view that with the provisions of the 2011 Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, that this provision, which authorizes a correctional officer to open fire on an inmate, may very well be in conflict with the Constitution with regard to the right to life. And the provisions, Mr. Chairman, it states at 15.6, and you would excuse me, sir, if I find not much comfort in this provision, but it states, the use of firearms under this section shall be as far as possible to disable and not to kill. Now, that would probably require marksmanship to a science, Mr. Chairman. So we believe that these provisions, because a person who is an inmate, may be an inmate for malicious destruction of property, unlawful wounding, could be murder, could be rape, etc. But from the reasonable and literal interpretation of the provisions, Mr. Chairman, it would seem that the inmate need not be attacking, need not be armed. The only precondition is that the correctional officer must form the view that he cannot prevent the escape. There is also the guard orders of 1994, where it empowers the correctional officer to shoot even persons who may be outside the facility, who they believe those persons are helping to facilitate the escape. So those provisions, Mr. Chairman, we believe need urgent attention. And I think amendment to the provisions of the Corrections Act will enhance our system of justice. Right. Now, Mr. Chairman, let me just indicate also that from a legislative perspective, INDECOM had done a report in 2020, our Q3 report of 2020. And from that report, we had focused on the Rio Cobre juvenile facility. And we had identified some challenges there. There were instances where inmates would have been locked up, the accountability for the...
Mr. Faulkner, yes. Just to be clear though, the Rio Cobre facility is a youth facility.
Yes.
Right, so I think you need to make that very clear.
Yes.
To the committee. It's not for persons over 17 years old.
Right.
Okay.
Right. You're correct, member. Southeast Centre, I believe. Right. So thank you very much. That is so. So, Mr. Chairman, we had done a report, and as the member had indicated, on the Rio Cobre juvenile facility. And we had found certain areas of concern which we had highlighted in the report. One of the areas of concern that we identified, which touches our goal number one, which is the legislative aspect, is that Rio Cobre, which is a juvenile correctional facility, so inmates under 18 who have been convicted in a court of law could be sent to the Rio Cobre juvenile facility. Rural folks would call it picnic prison. When you become the age of 18, if the sentence exceeds that, then you would transfer into the adult prison. But what we found, and we are of the belief that that situation continues, is that children who were deemed uncontrollable were subjects of a correctional order by the judge. A child who is deemed uncontrollable, Mr. Chairman, and today's environment may be a little different, but in my days, school ends at 3 p.m. and you step in the house at 8 o'clock in the night. You are wayward, etc. But the uncontrollable does not rise to a conflict of law where there was a criminal charge. So it is our position that a child deemed uncontrollable is a child with a behavioral problem who ought not to be at a correctional facility. And so we had made that recommendation, and to be fair, I have heard government ministers indicate that changes and steps would have been made to to make amendment to section 24(2)(a) of the Child Care and Protection Act, which gives the judge the power to make a correctional order, not for a child that has been found guilty of a criminal offense. Because in Jamaica, once you are above age 12 or more, that is our criminal age of discretion, you could be charged for a criminal matter and found guilty and sent to a correctional facility. But the child who is deemed uncontrollable, only thing has been established is behavioral problems for which the parents find them uncontrollable. They probably answer to no command, etc., Mr. Chairman. And we can understand the frustration. But the outcome ought not to be that you are sent to a correctional facility. So we are asking the Parliament to hasten its correction of this anomaly. So in a sense, Mr. Chairman, that's primarily the legislative attention that we seek of the Parliament of Jamaica.
Mr. Chairman, if I could make a recommendation to save the time of INDECOM. We've read your very, very impressive and comprehensive reports, particularly the goals and the missions. So I was wondering, just to be able to fast track how we can ask you questions so that you can delineate the information a little bit more, perhaps, Mr. Chairman, at this point, Mr. Faulkner would allow us to ask him questions on the mission and goals and the mission statement moving forward. Because I know there are about four more goals that he would wish to expound on, but may we begin to ask you some questions on your goals?
Well, Madam Member, I am at the directive of the committee.
Okay, I was thinking along those lines in terms of members wanting to ask questions.
Very well, sir.
Before you complete your presentation. So therefore, I know Member Anna would have indicated, so you can pose your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Faulkner, formally good morning.
Thank you.
A pleasant good morning to, let me try this.
Member, yes.
A formal good morning to the rest of your team. Thank you for agreeing to be here, and my apologies personally for being late. I had another meeting which took up a little bit more time. And thank you for the comprehensive report. I know based on your staff, it took a lot perhaps to get these out, and I don't take them for granted. My first question, however, relates to your funding. In other words, I can remember and recall when INDECOM came into being. At that time, there was a real outcry about extrajudicious killings in Jamaica by the police force. And certainly around that time, multilateral funding agencies, that was on the top of their agenda in terms of ensuring that their funding went to countries to help arrest the development of that kind of atrocity in their minds. And since then, there have been other things, on the financial agenda of multilateral agencies, whether it be LGBTQ, whether it be children in lockups. So sometimes I always felt that there was this external oversight eye on how we govern the lives of our country, even though we are a democracy on our own, and we have an enviable democracy that is an example in many instances to the world and our agencies. And the fact is that we do need oversight. So the only concern I have, though, is in your comment, which spoke to the fact that you still get aid from what was DFID. And based on your goals, my first question is, are these goals as a direct recommendation from your funding agency? That's my first question. My second question is, goal number 5 that you have is moving the agency to robust, independent investigative agency. Commission, I should say, not agency. When I look at your data, since 2010, you've had about over 9,000 complaints that have been brought to you. And one of the things that I've recognized is you speak to the fact that you have to know, as a commission, ensure that you have the requisite legal staff to clear the backlog of cases. You have about 1,000 backlog of cases. You've cleared 500 of them. Drilling down even more, and it's good to see the data, a lot of that is assault. Basically, the overarching complaints that have come in are about assault, some fatal shootings, and you go down, and Kingston and St. Andrew is your main area or hotbed where most of the complaints come in. What goes into an investigation, Mr. Faulkner? So when a complaint comes in, for my purpose, what goes into an investigation?
Right.
And then what happens to the police officer when that investigation is going on? Because if it's taking that long to do an investigation and to get a report forward, I want to know what happens to the police officer who is being investigated. The information that comes to me from officers who are being investigated is that they're taken off duty, they're not paid, they have to find their own lawyers, and it puts a real strain on them. And then what I hear from the other police officers is that because they don't want to end up in a situation where they're not getting a monthly salary, plus they have to pay a lawyer, they have a hands-off approach, even if they see something. That's some of the information that comes to me. And then the third question is, I remember when I was Minister of Youth and Culture, and that's why I'm intimately knowledgeable about Rio Cobra and places like Metcalfe, because I visited them quite frequently, so I know. But we have to, when you speak about the correctional order, and that's true, because a judge can still give a correctional order,
Yes.
without the amendment to the legislation. It is a parent who takes that child to court, or the police station first, and has the child remanded, because whether the grandmother or the mother says, I cannot control this child, please, that child then goes to court, and then the parent has to say to that judge whether or not they want them remanded. The judge, from my recollection, can either say, look, we can take them to counseling and different things. But I remember in the system, children getting lost in the system for years because the parent did not want to take them back out. So I think in terms of amending the legislation, I'm in support of what you say. However, I think we need to be really realistic about what is happening in the society, where parents, even now teachers, from what I'm seeing at schools, are having to deal with a kind of behavioral pattern of youngsters. So the question I have to you is, apart from all of these other things that you're investigating, and we recognize that it's a behavioral problem with young people, not that leads to uncontrollable behavior, and we don't necessarily have the kind of psychiatric care and facilities for them, what will the Commission be doing? Changing legislation is one thing, but we need to have the attendant issues to solve the other matters so that if the child does come before the court, so what recommendations will you be making? Those are my three substantive questions.
Right. If I may comment, member, with regard to your final observation. From my research, and I would also add knowledge, there is no circumstance for which an adult could be sent to South Camp, St. Catherine District Prison, etc., without being convicted for an offense. So this is an anomaly for which adults do not face, which is to be given a correctional order for a behavioral problem. So my recommendation would be that the infrastructure, so you have juvenile remand centers. So a child who is held with a firearm, etc., can be taken to a juvenile remand center. So that is predicated on the fact that there is suspicion of the commission of a criminal offense or the charge with regard to a criminal offense. But for the child deemed uncontrollable, and you are perfectly correct, it is the parent or guardian who finds that child uncontrollable. But in the absence of that being predicated on a criminal charge, then a correctional order, in our view, would be the improper instrument. So we believe we probably need the framework. You have places of safety. So a child who is deemed in need of care and protection, hasn't done any wrong, accused of anything, maybe in a household where abuse is prevalent, is taken to a place of safety. So there ought to be an equivalent to handle the child deemed uncontrollable. If that child had crossed the line and was held on suspicion of a criminal offense, then the remand options would be available. So I believe the government and the parliament could consider some mechanism, some behavioral institution that such a child who is giving obedience problems but not committed a crime or suspected of a crime could be taken to. Right. Now, in terms of your first concern, member, the INDECOM, I have been there since 2020, that's about mid-2020, and I have not been no policy directive has been channeled to me by a funding agency from my own experience and from my inquiries, likewise, prior to my tenure. And we are independent. So if a funding agency, in my view, were to seek to direct our policies, then I believe there would be a moral question that one would have to ask whether you would continue with the funding relationship. Our legislation comes from this Parliament of Jamaica. And so I am satisfied that, to be fair, it is not necessarily a heightened concern of mine, because I've observed that even in other law enforcement bodies over the years, the law enforcement bodies have accessed assistance from overseas, and I can remember a particular period. So there are a number of institutional changes that the experience from other jurisdictions have helped us. But so far, thankfully, and I hope it remains that way, the funding has not been the source of any direction as to policy. Right. In terms of assault, member, you had indicated most of our reports, the annual reports, indicate that assault is the main category of complaint. In one of our recent reports, the firearm complaints was close to the assault complaints. But the firearm complaints include missed target where no one was injured but the police fired, etc. But assault, over the years, each report, when you look at the graph, the assault is the peak. And for assault, it includes the maybe swinging of a baton that didn't connect. So that would be assault at common law. Swinging of a baton that connected and created injuries. So assault occasioning bodily harm. Swinging of a baton that caught the eye and may result in blindness. So that assault occasioning grievous bodily harm. And we also include the wounding offenses. So that category of assault, it captures quite a number of offenses, and it is our number one area of complaint. But we have to be mindful, member, through Mr. Chairman, that while would command our more resources, the citizen who makes a complaint on assault requires the same level of diligence as the family who is grieving. So we are seeking to equip ourselves to ensure that the man who made the assault complaint, he too will get his report within a timely manner, and a commission's report is done, and if charge is to be pursued, that is done also. And we have also have a team dedicated to assault. So one of our teams, I won't name the team, but that team focuses on assault. And in terms of the assault member would also include the person who is in custody. So we not only looking at assault. If it mentions assault and that person is in custody, that person in many instances has no choice of going to a doctor. They are in custody. So we treat that as a rapid response request. It is better we visit the facility where he or she is and realize it's just a scrape him have on him ears, etc. But we do not know. And some assaults require immediate medical attention. So we have devised a medical response form that we serve on the facility for those who are in custody and alleged assault to ensure that all the steps to ensure immediate medical attention is given. A hit in the chest may have consequences that the untrained eye may not see. A hit elsewhere can have lasting consequences. So we have the assault for the person who is not in custody and the assault for the person in custody. And we have to give them member, if not the Attorney General at the end of the chain. It will be a cost to the taxpayers. So we try and respond diligently to that. Yes, right. So the investigative process, right, and my team also assisting me, for which I'm thankful. Right. So in the strategic vision, what we have observed is that, and INDECOM has been complemented by external bodies, not the least of which is Amnesty International. But the picture is not complete by us looking only at the complements. We have also had where the teacher makes some notes in the margins. And one of the notes that we have been seeking to remedy is that we need to have a system where our complainants, and when resources are short, you will tend to try your best to contact the family who for somebody died for them. But you have 100 others, as you pointed out, member, who assault complain. So our contact, update, keeping them abreast of the investigation was a challenge. So notwithstanding the accomplishment, that was a challenge. So since 2020, we have placed on board one family liaison officer. But one family liaison officer member is inadequate. We have 3 regional offices, 5 investigative teams across. So part of my strategic vision and the INDECOM strategic vision is to increase family liaison officers who provide the empathy, provide the sympathy, the contact, and we are even seeking to expand that to social intervention referral. Because there are instances when you go to a scene, and at that scene, you may observe abject poverty. There might not be running water, there might not be bathroom facilities. So we are instituting a mechanism, and we have commenced the steps for the referral. Because what we are doing will have judicial consequences, we will play no role in that but to have the referral. So we are seeking to establish a referral protocol in those situations that we see. So our court liaison officers, we are seeking to increase the stock of court liaison and family liaison officer. So the person who had made the assault report to INDECOM must be given a date and time when contact will be made and to update you on the case. So even if nothing happened within 6 months, we're awaiting ballistics reports, etc., the call must be made and the person made aware that so far this is where we are. We're awaiting ballistics. I can't say post-mortem because, to be fair, the lab has improved significantly with regard to post-mortem, but our challenge is ballistics. So in terms of the investigative process, the complaint comes in either by telephone. Sometimes we can initiate complaints. So if there's something within the media sphere that we believe need inquiry, we make that inquiry. The police, the JDF, and the Department of Correctional Services, they have a mandate to inform us of any incident that involves fatality, injury, or any allegation of abuse. So that is also one mechanism for us to be advised of a matter. And in terms of fatality and injury, that must be done forthwith. Indeed, indeed. And our new Go Case system, which touches on our goal number 2 in short order, and we have tactfully advised the law enforcement bodies, we will be able to have the statistical data on the responsiveness. So a fatal shooting cannot happen.
Mr. Faulkner,
Yes.
Let me just hasten your steps a little bit, because I'm listening to, and sometimes I'm hearing that it takes up to 6 months to do an investigation. I want you to answer me specifically on the steps. Once a complaint comes in, and I imagine investigations are provided free to a citizen, what happens to the person who is being investigated? In other words, if a complaint comes in against a constable or a police officer in a different rank, what happens to that police officer? Is it that when the report is completed that they're pulled from duty, or are they pulled from duty once the complaint has been made?
Right. So a great deal of that response would be within the purview of the law enforcement body. There are instances, and for example, in the period June, July to August, there were incidents that happened where we had to act without delay. And in a matter of days, arrests were made and charge proffered. So those matters go before the court. So we would have no input into any action of interdiction, etc., by the law enforcement body. So that concern is a concern of ours. The law enforcement officer is a stakeholder of ours, is a client of ours. So that is why we are seeking to ensure that as best as possible, we seek to have a 1-year maximum investigative completion, because an officer may be on hold for promotion and other adverse consequences as a result of the investigation. But those consequences are not within our jurisdiction. But we are mindful of that. And so our intent to hasten the processes professionally and diligently, not only for the complainant, but for the law enforcement officer who is adversely affected.
All right, Member Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning,
Yes, morning.
Mr. Faulkner, senior
Morning.
in a different capacity than I usually see you in the Parliament. You come from elsewhere.
Indeed, sir.
In the ministry.
Indeed.
I want to pick up, I have a couple of questions. I want to pick up on a couple of points that Member Hannah raised. First, and I think I feel why Member Hannah asked a question about your funding. Yes. And any instruction from external entities. I'll just make a comment rather than a question in that regard.
That relieves me of the obligation to respond, member.
Yes.
Oh, I see.
But I think it's important to posit it nonetheless.
Yes.
It is only in very extreme or near extreme cases that these instructions will come. They are usually subtle. They indicate, we know a lot of them refuse to provide funding for national security and other programs unless or until there is significant improvement in extrajudicial killing or steps are taken in order to reduce that number. And so those are the indirect and subtle way in which directions are given, because as a fund-independent country, we want these funding resources for our various programs, and so we comply. So the instruction is not given in an explicit way, but it is given implicitly by the other pronouncements made. And so the question that I would ask, but I know you bluntly you wouldn't answer, right, is that have any of those subtleties prevailed upon your agency? But I told you before, and I'm not going to go against my word, I won't ask you to answer, right? But I thought I'd posit that. But following from that too, I read going through the document, this one, Strategic Vision.
Yes.
And Member Hannah made a point clearly in her opening remarks about the precedents, the high level of judicial killing that prevailed. And not only the external agencies, but locally too, concerned about that and steps to be taken. So there was a bit of apprehension, fear. Let's face it, at some point people fear the security forces, that you may have this judicial killing. And that I think is the background to INDECOM coming into being. So critical and central in INDECOM's purpose, existence, is the extent to which it can cause those fear, those apprehension to be lowered. Now, the truth of the matter is that an organization's success is not necessarily measured in straight numerical, statistical data, but more some subjective parameters. How much that fear has been reduced to give the society a sense that they are not, the security force is not their enemy, right? Because there's a downside to that, in that citizens will be less likely to cooperate with the security forces in dealing with solving many of our crimes. So when I read the document, when I scan through the document, and particularly on page 12 of this document, 2.24, one of the goals, enhancing INDECOM's communication and engagement strategy with families, witnesses, and stakeholders. In perusing the document, that was the closest that I saw as an explicit goal. Because families of those who are victims of alleged atrocities are the immediate persons to the incident. And so I can see where you'd want to make sure that there is contentment and satisfaction there. But I never saw anything in terms of the broader society. And so my question is, one, if we recognize that, accept that as a critical, if not explicit, implicit goal of INDECOM, what actions do you take to convey to the public that there's a positive movement in that regard? And of course, you might come up with your statistical data and, all the other things contained in these reports, as Member Anna said, was quite extensive, towards it. So for me, the information compiled here, I see them more as tools towards achieving that goal rather than end goals, so to speak. Because if those goals, you mentioned about capacity building and all those other goals in the institution, if all of those are attained and still the society, the ordinary man in the street, in the communities, particularly in inner city communities, poor communities throughout Jamaica, feel still threatened, all those don't amount to nothing. The only data. Because government have a responsibility to ensure a better quality of life for our people by virtue of how they feel towards it. So I would love your comment about that. Next one, I'll just give about 3 at a time. The correctional institutions, and you cited in your overview the use of firearm. What came to my mind, and I'm thinking aloud here, Commissioner, when someone is incarcerated, we have escapes from time to time. In recent times, those are minimal. But you don't expect them to escape, but you expect them to conform to instructions internally and so forth. Would has any thought been given to whether or not firearms, as against things like taser and other instrument that is non-lethal but can ensure conformity by inmates in the prisons, are considered, or whether they are being used? If they are used, I'm not aware, so I just like you to entitle me on that. And as I mentioned about implements like tasers, pepper spray, again another non-lethal device that can control a subject. I see in the report that you gave about the incidences of shootings, which is mainly by the police, and those where persons never have any weapons, right? That number, I think it was about, 19 such cases, I think, if my memory is right. But still a reasonably substantial amount, right? If instruments like those in a non-life threatening, I'm told that one is use a firearm when their life is threatened, that's supposed to be the basis of which a firearm is brought into play. So when you draw the firearm, you must decide that you're going to shoot, right? If those considerations are put in the mix, and in that regard, maybe more directed to the JCF than to you, Commissioner Faulkner, how extensive is the availability of taser and so forth in the JCF in their normal patrolling activities? So I'll just leave those
Right.
few for now.
Right. Thank you for the thought-provoking observations, member for Southern St. Catherine, I believe. I would invite you, member, in terms of your perspective, and you had sought to measure the fear that the citizen has with regard to the interaction with the security forces. Fear to the extent that that fear may or may not lead the citizen not to cooperate with the security forces or not to provide information. But I would invite you, and again, this is from my own analysis, that part of what the institution of INDECOM seeks to do. And in looking at the genesis of the commission, in the case of Mr. Michael Gale had sought the intervention of an external body, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. So, Mr. Chairman, I believe, and that body was critical of Jamaica, and we're touching on the external perspective. That body had almost formed the view that the security forces were incapable, they had used strong language, of investigating themselves, and if I may convert their language to local parlance, they were saying with the squaddy mentality, the law enforcement body would not be able to diligently, thoroughly, objectively, and independently investigate itself. So I'm mindful of the fair member for St. Catherine South. So part of the establishment of INDECOM sought to do was to provide the public with the confidence that there is now a body which is independent of the security forces that can investigate your complaint. So in all we do, Member Jackson, we have to be mindful that whether it is assault, whether it is fatality, the citizen must get the impression that diligence and thoroughness attended to their matter, regardless of the outcome of the matter. We must be able, as an oversight body, and we have seen the scrutiny placed on other oversight bodies that the public looks at, but we are guided by the provisions. But it is of importance that the public be satisfied that the diligence, the thoroughness, the objectivity is there. And I believe INDECOM, in the execution of its duty, is a reminder to the public that there is now a body, because you may recall, remember, that the Police Public Complaints Authority, those provisions were repealed. And part of the challenge was that the public, the investigation, certain aspects of it were actually carried out by law enforcement bodies. So it was somewhat semi-independent. So, indeed, sir, indeed. So that is one of the, we are mindful of the fear. And to the extent of the fear, we will be expanding, and we are seeking to have one more public relations officer, and along with the family liaison officers, to go into communities, also to explain to communities their own obligation in terms of compliance, etc. But I think one essential aspect is that that confidence is there in the public for the independence. And if I might just close with some data, Member Jackson, 2020, 1,098 complaints came to INDECOM, the highest in our history. Mindful though, members and Mr. Chairman, that 2020 was actually months into the COVID, and we had the Disaster Risk Management Act and all the attendant provisions with regard to curfew and gatherings and other, that created interaction with the citizen and the police at parties, etc. So we had 1,098. In 2021, we had 1,056, and I'm speaking from memory. And in last year, 2022, when essentially the COVID provisions were relaxed, we had 900 and I believe 68, Hamish? Yeah, right, in that region. So the last 3 years, member, has seen quantum of complaints never seen before, which somewhat could indicate, I wouldn't want to say impropriety, allegations of impropriety, which that's what they are, as well as confidence. So the persons are coming. So that confidence we have to maintain by how we treat with the matters. But the fear which you have...
Just on that point,
yes.
Commissioner, that data stood out to me too. Yes. And you spoke in the report about that decline, 9% the complaints to the Commissioner, and then you have a 14% within the JCF category. I always like to go behind the numbers, because the numbers by themselves is not fully instructive. You can have a reduction in complaint because people just lose hope. Not now go happen. That makes sense. I know for a fact, for a period, many people who are victims of crimes, necklace, watch, phone, grab and stolen, never went to the police. Those numbers are not going to be reflected in the police report. So it might give the appearance as there's an improvement. It's not. Get worse. Get worse not only in the actual numbers, but worse because of the decrease in confidence. Right. So, as I said, as you mentioned about those numbers, I just want to put that in the mix.
Yes, yes.
That importance of looking behind the numbers to see what really is happening. I can't challenge it because I don't have the data, but mindful of that too, right, based upon my on the street.
Well, I share
experience.
that caution, member. Yes. Right. You had also indicated whether we would be comfortable with less lethal measures, and I believe we have recommended that, member, in terms of, especially with dealing with what the common word is boisterous. The reports would say the person behaving boisterous, etc. And we have been encouraging from report to report the use of less lethal methods to subdue physical aggression. And our data will indicate to you that there are instances when the firearm is the tool of option, when we believe the chemical irritant could be used, the baton could be used, and even with the baton, we'll be instilling further caution. Because, remember, the baton, the manufacturers of the baton state that a blow to the head may cause permanent injury or death. We, in short order, that will be part of our statistical capture. Remember, we indicated, member, that with a new case management system, which we are about to implement, our data capture will be broader. And one of the headings that we'll be placing focus on is the blows to the head. And so we share your view, sir, that non-lethal options used in a discretionate manner and proportionate to the threat could be employed. And another song that we have sung over the years, myself and Assistant Commissioner, is the use of body-worn cameras. And we believe that the presence of cameras will sometimes be a better guide for discretion on the exercise of force. We have had dialogue with both the JCF, the JDF, and the DCS with regard to the deployment of body-worn cameras. With regard to the JCF, I anticipate additional resources in that regard in the new financial year. we have recommended that the officers who encounter heavy interaction with the motoring public be equipped with body-worn cameras. We have seen numerous instances where dialogue becomes physical. And as the member had indicated, again, those tend to fall within the area of assault. And we believe that the camera can be sometimes provide, and I would say most times, provide a more accurate picture than the subjective human mind who is speaking with a particular interest, either to exonerate self or to embellish a story. So we have been making the encouragement. So again, we are asking Parliament to ensure that the requisite funding to the law enforcement bodies for body-worn cameras are expedited.
Mr. Chairman.
Just a moment. I have a member Wilson just before you, but I just want to make one intervention. In your report, you mentioned the results of your investigations and so on,
yes,
and the amount of investigation that you would have made. Coming out of these investigations, do you meet with the police or the army or the correctional services? Have you met with these persons to indicate to them any form of recommendation, you know, coming out of your findings from your investigation?
Yeah.
Do you have a that kind of interaction with the officers to say, well, these are some of our findings, yes, what kind of mitigation strategy they could apply to improve, the conditions in terms of their approach?
Yeah. Well,
do you have such?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that is my style and nature, but I must indicate that this is a process which had preceded me. I have what is considered stakeholders meetings. So between January to early March, I met with the High Command of the JCF, I met with the High Command of the JDF, I met with the leadership of the DCS, I met with the executive director and team and ballistics team of the forensics lab. I met with the Police Federation, and I can't say the comments from the Federation have always been commendations. And we nevertheless, we felt it our duty, and we met with the Federation. So that is part, and we provide at those meetings a platform for any concern that they have to air. And in terms of data, we have had indications in terms of data, how the data is expressed. I don't think we have had any challenge in terms of the accuracy of our numbers, but in terms of the delivery, and we have had critique as to the wording, etc. But essentially, the substance of our reports have not been challenged. But we provide that forum, Mr. Chairman, for the stakeholders to indicate to us, where do you believe we are going wrong, so that we can do the requisite introspection, etc.
Member Wilson.
Thank you, Chair, and members of INDECOM. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, so first, going right back to the body cam, because that was something I wanted to interrogate more. You have in the statistics where assault is the greatest number of complaints that we have at INDECOM at the moment. I wanted to pick your brain as it relates to body cam, if you are of the view that this would reduce the incidences of assault in police carrying out their operation. That's my first question. Then I looked at the overall numbers of shootings, and I see where I think it will be more accurate to say they fluctuate over the period, because we see where in 2020 the number of complaints or shooting victims went up based on the numbers presented here. So the question I wanted to ask, as it pertains to the operation and the vision and the philosophy of INDECOM, is it that the police are operating differently, or is it if INDECOM is taking effect in terms of their policy, or is it that police are better trained? I'm still not seeing where I'm coming up with an answer as to whether these numbers can be attributed to the operations of INDECOM. I would say, or would it be that the police are better trained because they are now, they have included different aspects in how they are operating and interacting with the public. And another thing on the statistics that was presented, I've seen where the number of complaints, and it wasn't separated per parish, but I've seen where the number of complaints somewhat correspond with our parishes that have the higher crime rates. So I'm the MP for Westmoreland Western, and I see where I think it was 54 complaints that was from that parish. Yes, 54. And I've seen where Kingston, St. Andrew, St. Catherine, St. James, and Westmoreland are at the top of the list. So I wanted to find out, and those are the parishes that we would, when you look at the security data, would have most incidences of crime. So is it as a result of the police, the frequency of the operations in these parishes, because they carry out more operation to capture persons who are defiant of the law? And the last question I have was pertaining to something you mentioned earlier about the legislature, where you even gave an example where you said persons who even were evading an escape can be shot, if my memory serves me correct, at the outside. I wanted to know what being a man of your experience and intellect, what would be the proposal from INDECOM, how such a situation should be dealt with? Because again, we have to remember the realities of Jamaica, the realities of small arms and its impact on our society and our youths. So I'm quite interested to find out what proposal would be forthcoming in such a situation.
Right. Thank you, member for Westmoreland Western. If I may touch on your last point. In terms of the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms, the Charter enlisting the rights guaranteed to the citizens of Jamaica lists first the right to life. When life is lost, it is irreversible. That's one infraction that cannot be corrected. It is irreversible. So as the Commission of Parliament, we have to be guided by the principles held sacred by the Constitution of Jamaica. The incidents of prisoner escape.
I don't want to really stop you, but the view is that generally persons are more protective of the right of the perpetrator and not the victim. I can echo that sentiment, and I'm pretty sure a lot of persons will say that. So I agree with you totally, but there is always an emphasis on the perpetrator's life and not the life of the victim.
Yes. And the victim in your scenario would be, who would be the victim?
For example, in such a scenario where there is a planned escape, it could be the life of the security officers. It could be person standing by, but the guy's there with a gun. We have to face the reality. That's why I wanted to know what the proposal is.
Yes, right. So the circumstances that I have outlined with regard to Section 15 of the Corrections Act does not include where the officer comes under threat. The provisions of this section, from, in my view, a reasonable and literal reading, empowers the correctional officer to act utilizing a lethal option where he forms the view that he cannot prevent the escape. And that is the troubling aspect. So if a person is escaping, has a weapon, and seeks to attack, to hurt, to maim, to injure the correctional officer, that correctional officer will be protected under law by the rules of self-defense. The rules of self-defense, Mr. Wilson, they terminate the moment the threat has dissipated. These provisions, in our view, allow the utilization of a deadly weapon in instances where there is no threat and not necessarily any harm. There's no condition to this, that the person. And I do not make reference to cases we are investigating now because we are not complete with the investigation. And again, in one of the instances, we're awaiting ballistics. So as I indicated to you, the assistance to the lab in terms of ballistics will be helpful to the family of the victims, etc., to the officers involved in terms of just time. So I'm mindful of the perception that indicates that the INDECOM seeks to protect the rights of the alleged perpetrator. I believe that is a perception not concretized by fact. We zealously guard our mandate to be independent, to be objective. But we have to be mindful that the law enforcement bodies are armed, sometimes with small arms, sometimes with heavy powered weapons. They have the power of arrest. They have the power to enter your premises in some instances without a warrant and under some legislation. So the citizen, and I know it is easy for it to be termed that the citizen is the perpetrator, but I think INDECOM it's basically there to ensure that in the execution of its duties, the law enforcement bodies do not abuse the citizens, and that's a mandate. But we seek not to victimize neither officer or citizen, just to investigate diligently, independently, and objectively. But as I indicated, the circumstances that we have outlined wouldn't even raise self-defense. But I cannot make mention of cases we are investigating now.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, member, yes.
Are you through? What is the other thing that you wanted to comment?
Right, one more.
You have two more questions. Yeah?
Yes, you had asked about whether we are of the view that body-worn cameras would reduce assault, Mr. Wilson. Again, in terms of the statistical correlation between a particular conduct and the diminution of that conduct or the exacerbation of that conduct, sometimes you may do, statistical injustice or disingenuity to try and claim that a particular action. It will be difficult, but what I could reassure you, member for Western Westmoreland, is that the body-worn cameras will provide, in most cases where the footage is not edited, you can identify the authenticity of the author and the reliability of the instrument. In most cases, it will give you a clear picture of what happens. What that serves? The interest of justice. So whether the statistic goes up or down, important, yes, but the value that we see from that is that it provides an independent account. If you look at the assault cases, officers were saying, we gave instructions, person became boisterous, attacked. The citizen is saying, I was saying something, officer attacked. So you have the conflicting reports. Many times, the body-worn cameras provide you with the clearest of account of what transpired. So I think the greatest beneficiary, Member Wilson, would be the interest of justice and the investigative process.
Member Wilson, you're through?
Right. You were asking whether the reduction in complaints against the JCF was a result of they being better trained. Right. So, INDECOM, we are of the view, and again, some of our findings, so there may be a matter that it does not rise to the legal threshold for a charge. But there are instances when we advise the security forces, whether it's the numerical recurrence. So if you have an officer at a particular station, for that one officer you have 15 complaints of assault. That tells you something, Mr. Wilson, that training may be necessary to be revisited by the High Command, whether the allegations are able to be elevated to a charge or not. In terms of accidental discharge of firearms, we advise the security forces again for the officer's own safety, where his firearm is being discharged not at his will, for his own safety and for the public safety, again, we advise. So in terms of training, we look at the perspective of the officer's safety, the risk to that officer, the multiplicity of fatalities that this officer has encountered. So we cannot give an explanation as to why there's a reduction, but we are grateful for it. But in terms of the opportunities for training, we have routines that we follow where certain activities must be advised to the security forces. So we don't necessarily just seek to charge or purportedly exonerate you, but where we believe that training is necessary. So I don't think we are capable at this point to attribute the reduction to any particular one index. Yeah.
Thank you. Member.
Thank you, Mr. Faulkner. The information that you also provided suggests that 85% of the investigations or complaints coming in are from the JCF. And
yes,
obviously it is the largest organization.
It
so
is.
Between the DCS, which is the Department of Correctional Services, and the JDF, the JCF is to protect and serve.
Yes.
So they are the main law enforcement unit that's out there. I want to go into some of the other statistics you gave, because this report is dealing with July 2020 to June 2021. Something jumped out at me. One of the statistics jumped out at me. Come with me to page 14 of 31 in your INDECOM quarterly. 14 of the 250 officers account for a further 112 deaths, with one officer alone accounting for up to 20 deaths. 19 of the 120 men shot and killed had no gun or other weapon, were subject to at least 300 rounds fired at them. In 74 of the 110 incidents, 89 firearms were recovered. No body-worn camera was cited as deployed in any of the 110 incidents. This goes to the heart of INDECOM's work, because it demonstrates to me that in terms of your investigations, you've been able to go in and identify some of the real issues. But when I look further at your information, when you investigated some of the fatal shootings, some of the police officers were not charged. So, and most of them actually were not charged.
Correct.
And that's interesting from where I sit, because like Fitz, I like to go behind the numbers, because the context of our Jamaican reality, oftentimes when you look at a statistic, contextually, the statistic does not bear out with the reality. So when you have, for instance, one officer alone accounting for up to 20 deaths, what happens in a circumstance when you speak to that officer? What is the circumstance there? And why, of the one, when persons are killed, no gun or other weapon, 19 of the 120 men shot and killed, 19 of the 129 shot and killed did not have a gun on them. So it stands that over 100 of them had a gun on them, at least. Is it that they were being fired upon? Is it that the police came under extenuating circumstances? Is it that they are more trained to fire in particular ways to ensure death if they feel like they were being, their lives were in danger? Is this during the COVID period where we had the protocols and there was supposed to be no movement and certain things happened? I'm trying to identify. A police officer is trained. They go through rigorous training, right? They may, when they go to apprehend someone, I don't know what they come upon. You know, you might have a youngster who just can fight better than a police officer, or gets boisterous. I've seen incidents where a woman will take off all her clothes so a police officer can't hold her, and they can bawl for something else if they feel. And so a police officer gets a hands-off approach because they don't want to be charged for sexual harassment or being told of something else. What happens? And I think this is what the member from Westmoreland is trying to ask. I was trying to ascertain it in the beginning. What really happens, why police officers feel they must shoot when they shoot, what they come upon, and just tell me from your own experience, when you speak to the officer, when you speak to the community person, because when you go through it, you know, many of the officers are not charged. Based on your report, a lot of them for those fatal shootings are not charged. So what happens?
Right. Member, I'll respond, but I'll allow Assistant Commissioner to give a perspective on it.
Good day. I think all the points you raise are correct, and they're the very questions that we ask ourselves. I think the purpose of the report, that particular study, was to generate the debate with the police service primarily, and for them, because they don't collect the data in that way, and they don't have the benefit of having the time necessarily to look at it in that granular detail. And it is to engender discussion. And of course, the greater majority of police officers are not charged. Probably 95% of all shooting incidents do not result in a charge. That small percentage which do are very clear because there's CCTV evidence or an eyewitness who's able to give a very different account to the point, or forensic evidence. But a great majority of the shootings are, to use an American term, lawful but awful. So the use of force has been necessary, and the individual officer is concerned for his own life or safety of himself or another. But what is happening for a lot of these cases is that tactics and approach could be different in some of the circumstances. Because once a police officer draws the gun, there's almost an inevitability about what will happen. He will certainly, mostly he, will use it, and resulting in death and injury. So behind all these numbers is a great depth of analysis to say, was it really necessary to be in the position where you place yourself? If we look at mental health patients, the greater majority of mental health patients, the police are called by the family or friends to come and help them deal with somebody who's already been causing havoc, distress for the last hour. Within about 3 minutes of most attendances, the person is shot dead. Yes. So how is the context of time, patience, de-escalation, cover? So that's just a subset. And within this number are mental health patients. So it's an example of there are perhaps different ways of approaching some of these issues. The body-worn camera, the use of pepper spray, tasers, which actually the Jamaican police force don't have tasers at the moment. So we raise up all this information for the debate to be encouraged as to how can we change some of these issues. And that's why we counted the number of rounds, because the police officers tell us how many rounds they fired, and we can see how many rounds they fired from their own records. And so many thousands of rounds are being fired. It's for the police to answer, as we had the discussion with the police. If they consider that's a legitimate use of firepower, when the greater majority are not hitting anybody, there needs to be some reflection on who are you shooting at? Who are you aiming at? Perhaps you're not actually aiming in fear and frightened. Of course they are. And so there needs to be a better response. So I think all the questions you ask are correct, and it's part of an ongoing discussion to say to the police service primarily, this is information for you to reconsider. And within that subset, the one officer, as an example, who's been involved in some 20 shootings, we highlighted that that's where Constable Collis Brown was back in 2011. He had been responsible for 60 fatal shootings, 62. And he eventually came to notice, and as you know, he was convicted and serving 51 years imprisonment. But he started off as a constable without any record and joined the police service, and then finds himself more and more involved in these matters where he's put forward, where he's one of the officers who will be the front man, and there's a risk, that's all we're saying is, and we've discussed, the risk of becoming so involved in shootings, you're in danger of becoming inured and immune to the outcomes. That's
yeah,
really
and,
what we're
and Mr.
at.
Chairman, I'm really happy that I was able to ask those questions, because it gives me a better overview of the circumstances on the ground, primarily because of the assault and other kinds of complaints that come in. What is clear to me is there needs to be a different approach in even the way we look at arresting the development of crime in this country. In other words, I agree with you with the body cameras. I agree with you with other kinds of technology that would be able to give our country better transparency in the way that our law enforcement officers deploy their duties. I think what it also does, we have a tendency sociologically and also historically to rule by fear. So we go into communities and they will see a police van driving, and it is done to get people to stay inside, perhaps, and to drive fear into a community versus working with. And I want to single out our police officers who have been doing a stellar job in terms of community action, the police service groups I have in my own constituency. They work with young people. And so there are police officers out there that are really, really trying. And they too, as an MP, I won't tell you some of the things that basic amenities that they come to me to help them with in a police station. And there has to be some degree of balance in the equation. We have to support them on both the police on a humanitarian level, because their human rights need to be respected. So you can't be in a space and you don't have a fridge or working cars and things of that nature. So you have to give them the dignity that way as well, so that when they go out, they don't snap. Because if you are getting to a point where you have a car and you're taking forever to get to an investigation and you come upon a particular kind of firepower, because sometimes these guys have more firepower than the police. So all I'm saying is I'm really happy to have heard and read through some of this, but it breaks my heart too, because I don't think in this country that we've really, there are lots of reports and different studies, but I don't think we've come to a degree of understanding of what it will really take to solve crime and violence in the country, based on what I'm seeing here, based on what I'm hearing from you, based on my own information, based on everything. And I think somehow, Mr. Faulkner, even though you have your goals and you're asking for more things, the oversight is great, but I want to get to a point where our citizens trust our police are working in the best interest of our country, which I know everybody wants to happen, and that at the end of the day, we don't have these kinds of significant behavioral atrocities. Because at the end of the day, it's all behavioral. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right. If I may add, member, and I think one of the outcomes that will reassure, if I may use that term, the officers and reassure the public, we have to look at ourselves, INDECOM. What can we do better? One, you have pointed out of the lower percentage of officers not charged. I believe globally that is the situation where the percentage of charge, if you have a security forces where the charge levels are higher, then that may be indicative of a particular direction within that country. So the numbers ought to be low. In any civilized, orderly society, the percentage ought to be low. But even whether they are low or not, we will highlight the numbers. But I ask you this. One, what can we look at in terms of our investigative integrity? The law enforcement body has a duty to advise INDECOM forthwith, as we had touched on, right? Fatality, injury. INDECOM, our new case management system, will be able to statistically compile the reporting period. So eventually, in our quarterly reports to come, if a fatality took place and we are advised 2 hours after, 3 hours after, Madam Member, do you believe that an investigative team reaching at an incident scene hours after, the integrity of your finding? Very well, very well. So we will be addressing that aspect of in terms of the reporting. In terms of fatalities, you may also find, and I know, member, that this may be clear to you already. Where there's a fatality, the gentleman apparently ran to the back of a house, only police him. You have one account of what transpired. Only compelling circumstantial evidence can put you in a position to challenge that single account. So there are a number of, thank you. Right.
Mr. Chair, just a quick other question. In your opening remarks, you had mentioned about your staff, and it doesn't have any JCF members. Is that correct?
You cannot be a serving member of the JCF and be on staff at INDECOM.
Can be former?
Former, yes, for any law enforcement body, and that link
No, I
has
just wanted for clarity.
Yes,
Former
investigators, right, both for local and in the Caribbean also.
Sat here, Commissioner, and when you were answering about you refer to the JCF as one of your stakeholders, and I smiled. Mm-hmm. One of the very discernible difference now is that I've not heard, maybe I just don't hear, there's no open antagonism between INDECOM and the JCF. I've had the benefit of sitting here when your organization has come. And there was a high level, I dare to say, antagonism between both organizations. I sense less. I hope what I'm not seeing is in fact what it is, an absence of or a substantial reduction of that antagonism. And that leads me to ask the question, and I know particularly it would have been the Police Federation, who represents the rank and file members of the JCF, that would be in contention with it, for whatever the reasons. So just ask the question, how would you summarize the working relationship between INDECOM and the JCF, and in particular the Police Federation as groups? Both the JCF in general and the Police Federation as a subgroup, so to speak.
Well, I have to be fair, member. And within recent interactions, we have made particular requests in terms of documentation, etc. And in short order, those documentations were provided. So I will rely less on the verbal expressions and place greater emphasis on action. So I am satisfied that there is improvement in the relationship between the oversight body and the law enforcement body.
I must say I'm very heartened by that.
Yes.
Very heartened by that. And particularly, Commissioner, because you both are two state agencies.
Yes.
It doesn't augur for the country as a whole if the institutions of the state cannot find a way to operate in an harmonious don't necessarily mean that everything is fully in sync, but at least in a reasonably functional way for the benefit of the society as a whole. So I'm particularly heartened by what you have. You see, the absence of war doesn't mean the presence of peace, you know.
Indeed.
You know, so it's important to know that peace prevails rather than just the absence of open warfare between both. So I'm encouraged by that.
Very well, sir. And we thank you for those observations.
Member Wilson.
All right, so thank you again, Chair. I was looking at page 22 of the quarterly report for the fourth quarter, and I also draw a reference to page 28, where the statistics is basically the recommendation. And I note where on page 28, where it looked at quarter October to December, 28 of 199 cases, which is roughly 14%, at the bottom of page 28.
Bottom of
The
page.
Commission's report recommendations.
Bottom of page.
28.
Page 28.
Yes. So I saw where you have charge and disciplinary action, 1 officer, disciplinary action 27, of a case total of 199, right? That gives us roughly 14%, what you'll call, charge rate, if you want to put it in that instance. And then I see where the total for the period January to December of the 808 cases, we have 111 cases, which is a similar 13.79%, which you call it 14%. So I've seen where over the entire period there is a disciplinary action of 14%. Could you tell me if this is a trend going back, because I haven't seen previous years going back for the past 2 or 3 years? Is it that it's declining, or is it increasing in terms of the number of cases being referred for disciplinary action? And that would say the JCF overall has, of all the cases that's been reported to INDECOM, JCF has in 86% of the case, which is quite overwhelming. There has been no substantial disciplinary action being taken, which is testimony to what JCF is doing in terms of their operations. But again, we would want to reduce this 14%, and I would want to know if this is trending down or up over the period. And then to the Commissioner who was speaking earlier about non-lethal operations, I wanted to know if INDECOM had done any cross-comparative study with other jurisdictions that uses these non-lethal apparatus in their police operations, and if there is a corresponding or there is some indication that it will yield, I'm a guy who likes data and to look at how things, if we implement it, what results we'll have. So I'd want to know if we have non-lethal apparatus being implemented in JCF, if we would see a corresponding reduction in assaults, which is the biggest issue right now, not necessarily shootings. So those 2 questions. Thank you.
Right. So in terms of discipline, INDECOM had issued a report where, coming out of a commission's report, which is the final report of the commission on an incident, we have made recommendations for discipline in a number of instances. We had done 27.
So the key question is it trending down? Because we have seen where for the quarter it's the same 14%, and it's quite equivalent for the year.
Yes.
So we would say for each quarter, cumulatively, it's 14%.
Right. I think that recommends the trend over the years. Where we had a problem, Mr. Wilson, is that we made the recommendations to the JCF. And when we had looked back at the data of 88 in one instance, and I think 138 for another, I believe, 3-year period or 5-year period, there was none of the disciplinary processes that was completed. And we highlighted that to the JCF. To be complete, now the JCF, whenever we make the disciplinary recommendations, they respond to us and indicate the process that the matter is going through. But I cannot say at this stage that there's any change in terms of the outcomes. But our jurisdiction stopped at the recommendation. So those would have been to Parliament, and any further inquiry action would be for the Parliament of Jamaica. So our jurisdiction would stop at the recommendation. So our challenge was that we couldn't, and again for completeness, there was one matter that was part heard, so it hadn't completed. So over a 5-year period, we couldn't have identified a matter that had gone through the investigative process to completion. So that was our challenge, which we have highlighted and we have expressed to the JCF High Command. So far, we have seen improved responsiveness in acknowledgement and outlining to us what is being done. So we await to see whether in the near future we will see that X amount of matters, disciplinary action was taken, the matter did not reach the threshold of disciplinary action, personal discharge, etc. So the outcomes, that's what we're looking at.
Mr. Wilson, please put on your mic.
Mr. Wilson, have a question. Yours, Hamish.
Yeah, so the other question I had was the comparison with Jamaica and other jurisdictions that would have used non-lethal methods, and whether the impact, the overall impact on incidences of assault and shootings, etc.
No, sir. We haven't done a comparison with other international forces, but it's something that could be looked at through. We're a member of the National Association for Civilian Oversight with the USA, so we could probably get some data from there. But we haven't compared like for like in that way.
I think that would be useful, in that we are not just proposing things because it's there and it's being proposed. It's, we can say we want tasers because tasers would reduce the incidences of our shooting. Even though in this instance I see where most of our incidences, 110 I think, firearms are covered. So it would be practical for us to ask our security forces to try to use a taser against somebody who's firing shots. But it would be interesting in the cases of assaults that's being reported and in other incidences, threats and etc., if these would see our numbers go down, so we would have as much complaints going for INDECOM. And it would be a testimony as well to you guys and the operations you have. So it would be interesting for us to know whether we have, the next time that you come and sit in front of us, that you can share that with us. Thanks.
But one thing also, Mr. Wilson, even less lethal weapons, you have operating procedures to follow. So even though a tear gas may be a less lethal weapon, there is no unfettered license that you can just tear gas a person. So the caution that is demonstrated with the use of a firearm, also judicious conduct, Mr. Wilson, will be required in the use of a taser. Also, a taser can create fatalities. We have seen that. So once we exercise that level of judicious analysis of a situation, then I think, we'd be on the right track. So even for the less lethal weapon, you ought not to be pepper sprayed in your eyes when you weren't posing as a threat. Right. So the standard operating procedures that go with the taser will also be of importance. But we believe your fatalities would reduce. And I see you paying a lot of emphasis on statistics, which we too are. And that is why in our strategic vision, we would include an analyst among our complement.
Members, is there any further questioning or observations? There being no further observation, I want to take this opportunity to thank the team from INDECOM. Thank you for your presence here today, and I think we would have exhausted most, if not all, the areas that we wanted to explore and analyze. So I want to thank you for such a comprehensive report. Thank you for your response here today, and we look forward to continue the deliberations as we go forward and seek to ensure that the functions of INDECOM and the relationship with our security forces continue to be of the standard that we would have set out to achieve. So I want to thank you again.
Mr. Chair, with your permission, just one last little suggestion.
Yes, Mr. Jackson.
In your documentation and in your delivery today, you mentioned about these things that you want Parliament to do. And you emphasize the point that you don't report to a ministry or minister, report to Parliament in your reporting. I'm just saying that you have to step up your lobbying. To merely write it in our report as a documented recommendation from your work is not sufficient. So you have a little bit, and I know you know to traverse the corridors, pertinent corridors. So I only want to encourage you to do that so that the identified gaps, identified shortcomings don't remain just in a document. All right.
Very well, sir. But let me just acknowledge that in such an instance, the legislation provides for the administrative assistance, and we have been receiving that from the Ministry of Justice. So let me just put that on the table. But nevertheless, in this forum, we had to highlight certain matters that we believe are of necessity. But Mr. Chairman, we thank yourself and the committee, sir, for the reception. And it was not only our pleasure, but our duty to be here.
And thank you again for coming, and just to say to you that we do not intend to detain you any longer.
Very well, sir. All right. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Be careful then, them dry sign again.
You're free to go. Yes.
You're free to go, but it's your Parliament, so if you want to stay.
Members, we'll move to item 8. Any other business? I don't know if you would want to indicate the agenda for our next meeting, date and time. Members, any suggestion?
On the next subject, I don't know if others have, but perhaps we could set ourselves a timeline, like by now and next week, canvass it through the secretary and engage. Off the top of my head, Chairman, we have 2 areas we could look at. The crime situation remains not just a topical issue, but a debilitating issue. And one of the purposes of these committees of the Parliament is to provide a forum for regular updating to the public, not just the committee members, to the public by engaging the various agencies of the state and stakeholder groups to do that for the public. And to the extent that that is so, I think the JCF would be one would want to have an update. Couple of things that jump out. The routine state of emergency is no longer in place. There are some short-term states of emergency being implemented in different parts of the country. So there is enough passage of time for us to look at the effect or impact of these in the respective areas and across the country. What is of note is that the JCF statistics report a 20% reduction compared to the same period last year. And you have less states of emergency now than you did then. It would be useful to probe what is transpiring so that we can have an appreciation based on those concrete data, not anecdotes, not notions, not feeling, not sentiment, but what the data is. Look at the period, look at the level of state of emergency then and now, and to the extent that you're having a reduction, that is instructive. And the country needs to have an appreciation of that. So I would suggest, as I said, that is one that we could set our side on. And the next one after that we could look at is the correctional institutions, right? There are some, personally speaking, there are some concerns that I have in respect to our capacity for incarceration in our detention remand centers and our prisons. We know we have a chronic shortage of space. Much talk about a new prison. To get a sense of where we are in that regard. And secondly, and importantly, Chairman, the Minister of Justice brought to the House recently proposal for increased minimum sentences, 30 to 45 years, etc. One of the arguments that has been posited is that well, not so much so on the crime prevention side, in respect of to what extent that will be a deterrent for the committing of criminal acts, but also on the other side of the incarceration, because if persons go in for a longer period, right, and you have a similar rate of intake, you're going to have a more rapid increase for more space because more people are staying longer, right? So to look at those implications, and I would hope that the correctional services with the expertise at its disposal or that which it can access would be able to give some analytical assessment, and also, which is our duty, to engage probably someone from the criminology department of the university to come and give us some insight. And I'm one of those who feel that we're not getting enough from the state finance tertiary institutions to help to guide our policy contemplations here. Those in academia spend more focused time on these subjects than we representatives who do, non-technical and professional work in those areas. But we ought to be the beneficiary of that reservoir of expertise that is available to us. So when we look at the proposed extension of time for minimum sentences, we would want the criminology department to, whet our appetite with some thinking on it. Because part of our role as Parliament, Chairman, is to help to, in the oversight function, is to provide advice to the executive through engaging that cross-section of people from the broader society. So I think in fulfilling up that duty of us as a committee, we could give consideration to that. So those are my thoughts in terms of the next subject. One, the update on the crime situation, and two, our correctional institutions. And as I mentioned about the correctional institution, I'm mindful of one recent prominent case recently where a person got lost in the prison system. And we made a lot in the Parliament about it not happening again. Where are we in preventing, not reacting, but preventing such occurrences? And to what extent any might still exist in the system that we are not aware of?
Thank you very much. Member Jackson, I do support your point in terms of the areas that we may want to bring to the fore. In terms of the issue you mentioned, the issue about the Minister of Justice bringing a bill to Parliament relative to the sentencing and the amount of time that one should spend on in incarceration for certain offenses. I think if the intention of the minister really is to create, deterrent, if that works, then I don't think it will impact the amount of persons who will be going into the prison. If we were to achieve that in terms of what the intention. So, but I think, it is important that we look at the issue, as you said, on a broad perspective and see how we can inform the executive. So I do support your view in that respect. Right, yeah. Member Wilson.
Yes, Chair. I was just suggesting, I'm amenable to some of the suggestions by Member Jackson, but we should possibly round robin with the rest of the. Yes, yeah, we could. No, oh yes, certainly. But we could definitely round robin with the rest of members just to get their feedback. But I'm definitely amenable to the state of emergency. We're looking at that one in particular.
So I think we are all agreeing with what Member Jackson is.
I made first, if we couldn't come up with any proposal to round robin, we are here now formally meeting as a committee, and as we have been reminded by, I think, the clerk of the House, the decision can't come from the chairman, it can't come from any one of us member, but the committee has to make the decision.
Right, so that is where
And
the
since the committee is in session now, is to utilize the fact that we are in session.
Yeah, I do agree with you, Member Jackson.
So we are settling on the next ones.
We are settling on those, but remember that
So
we have to get
we
we are settling on what you are saying. If we had the numbers.
Well, we have the number.
No, because how many members constitute the committee?
Yeah, man, 4 of us is constituted.
No, I agree, but we have to get the consent of the majority. So if the majority is
No,
absent
Chairman, you have it wrong.
No.
You have it wrong. Once the committee is in session and duly constituted, it is the majority that is in session. So it's the majority of us who are here now, not the majority of who constitute the membership.
If I were to look at the...
No, man, we can't do that now.
If I were to look at the standing orders, I believe, it is my understanding that it is the majority consent of members. I don't think it's specified whether you're
Let me tell you why
in
that could
session
not
or
be
not.
functionally so, Chairman. Where you have committees where members are perpetually absent and the majority of the members are absent, but the committee is constituted and in session, it means that the committee meeting couldn't do anything unless all of those absentee members give consent. And that's why there's a quorum. So the business can go on if the other members are derelict.
Okay, Member Jackson, I've been advised that your point is correct. So therefore, we can make that decision here, yes. But I support the view. I can get the opinion of the other 2 members. Member Wilson.
Well, the question could easily put if there's any objection to proceed as I proposed.
Right.
If not, we just agree and go forward.
To move within the suggestion in terms of I think we could agree on the first suggestion for the crime situation and allow that to flow, and then we could, look at the others in terms of when we meet again. So we'll go with your first.
First one is the JCF, right? But why not agree on both? Because the second one would need some preparation. It would not be fair to, for example, if we're inviting somebody from the tertiary institution, it don't have to be one, it could be more than one. I know a place like NCU do a lot of research work in that area, the University of the West Indies. We would need to give them sufficient time, like 2-3 weeks, so they could prepare to a presentation.
And that is why I remember I had said earlier that there is no objections to the state of emergency, but what we would do is send around the information and with the other members, and also we have to contact the entity, because I do know that there was a point in my short history in this parliament where we referred a particular issue and we're unable to interrogate it because the entity required more time. I think it was Ministry of Tourism at that point we were looking at. So that's why I had said, remember, that in the event that we contact the state of the Ministry of Justice to look at the state of emergency and they are unable to look at that, we could look at another issue.
If I may, so I think you have it wrong.
It's not about wrong, member.
No, because you are relating to what I said. I want to clarify. The issue is not whether or not the state of emergency should or should not be. That is not in debate.
That was not the suggestion, and I'm not sure where the miscommunication is coming from. But what I'm proposing is that we put forward, 2 or 3 topics, and we check with the entities if they are able to respond within the adequate time, because again we may just have to delay our next meeting until the entity is ready to present.
Mr. Colleague Member MP Wilson, this is the Parliament. This is the highest body of governance. we make the decision and we request of the JCF to come. We propose, we propose a time, as we normally do. My secretary is here. We normally do in all the committees where they have to come. We propose 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time. The secretary will get from them a feedback based on their agenda and other things to confirm that time or the earliest possible time. So their coming is at a discretion.
How is that different from what I propose?
No.
How is that anyway different?
No, but I just want us to be definitive, and I was not getting that.
But how is that different? How you wanted to say it? Is it that you wanted to say? I said the same thing.
No, if that is the case, then we are fine.
Okay.
But what I was sensing is that we are deterring on whether or not.
No.
Okay.
No.
So we will have that for the next meeting.
Yes.
The JCF to give an update on the crime situation.
No, what I want to know though, if we're going to be doing the crime report and SOE in one, because
No, man, separate.
Separate.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Because the prison one, the prison one is going to take some extensive.
Right. So
Yes.
so we have those two.
Right.
Yeah.
And I would like, my own thought is that it would be good if we have, say, about two different persons to give some perspective about
Yes.
whole matter.
We support that.
I start from the premise that there's a lot that I don't know. So I need to be informed by those who are seized on the subject.
Yeah. Member Wilson.
Yes, and Chair, I want to throw two areas as well. Agriculture is of keen interest to myself, looking at especially in light of the drought that is taking place now. I would want us to put the Ministry of Agriculture at some point on the list of topic areas. And as well, I'm looking at tourism again, with the recovery that has taken place. And I've had several stakeholder meetings. I would want to have possibly the Ministry of Tourism as well coming back to look at in particular the recovery that has taken place and the growth that has been happening within the sector. Thank you.
All right. In terms of the agriculture, I think that would have to go to the Economy and Production Committee. So it is not the remit of this committee to deal with that issue. So
is tourism.
And so is tourism.
No,
it has to go to the Economy and Production.
those are all economic subjects.
So if you're a member of that committee, you could raise it there. Yeah, but not at this committee.
Or I could suggest to the member, if the subjects or matter is of particular interest to him as an MP, another route that he can do, if he's not a member of the Economy and Production Committee and he wants to engage the stakeholders on it, the other alternative is to table a private member's motion, and in that motion, you request that the matter be referred to that committee, right? And in it, you can ask, as the member moving the motion, to participate in that discussion. So you have some locus standi in the deliberation. Oh, fine. Yeah. Just refer it there. But you could, if you remember the committee, you just, in that committee, seek to have it as a subject.
Members, we are looking at the possible dates here, and Clark has advised that we could take one of the Tuesdays in April. Right, so... Well, I would look at the third... I would look at maybe the second Tuesday. The 11th. So we have enough time to inform to prepare. Right. In terms of looking at the crime situation, is there any other suggestion in respect of any other representative that we would want to invite?
Yeah, I was suggesting the public defender. Still not a state office.
Member Wilson? Good. JFCF and the public. All right, members, I want to thank you for your input here today. And I now move for the item 10, which is the adjournment. Moved by... I was giving... Thank you very much. Moved by Member Wilson, seconded by Member Jackson. This meeting is now adjourned.
Can you seniority and move?